Hello everyone, how are you all doing? I hope all of you are doing great. So in this video, we are going to talk about request and limits in Kubernetes. Whether you are a student, a working professional, or simply curious, this video will help you to learn about one of the most important concepts in Kubernetes. Many a times while experimenting with Kubernetes, you would have seen that the pod is getting stuck in pending status because no node had sufficient CPU or RAM available to run it. Here comes the greatest strength of Kubernetes, that is, ability to efficiently utilize the compute resources with request and limits. So what are request and limits? Request and limits are the mechanisms Kubernetes uses to control resources such as CPU and memory. Request defines the minimum amount of resources that containers need. So how request affects the pods which are scheduled in Kubernetes? When a pod is created, the scheduler finds the nodes which can accommodate the pod. But how does it know how much CPU and memory is needed? The app within the pod has not started yet, and the scheduler can't inspect the memory and CPU usage at this point. This is where request comes into the picture. The scheduler reads the request for each container in your pods, aggregates them, and finds the best node that can fit that pod. Some applications might use more memory than CPU, others will use the opposite. It does not matter, Kubernetes checks the request and finds the best node for that pod inside the Kubernetes cluster. Now, what's the limit? Limits define the maximum amount of resources that the containers can consume within that node. Now, when the container process exceeds the limits defined, Kubernetes will kill the process with an out-of-memory killing message. When a process running in a container touches or exceeds the defined CPU limits in Kubernetes, the behavior depends on the CPU throttling policy, which is implemented by the container runtime. Now, what will happen if a container specifies its own memory limit but does not specify a memory request? So, Kubernetes will automatically assign a memory request that matches the limit. Similarly, if a container specifies its own CPU limit but does not specify a CPU request, Kubernetes automatically assigns a CPU request that matches the limit. So here I have a pod definition file. So here you can see I have two containers named container 1 and container 2, and I have defined request and limits for both the containers. So here you can see I have defined the request, and here is the limits. Similarly, for container 2, I have defined the request and the limits. So now if you see, for container 1, I have defined the memory request as 64 MI, and CPU is 250 millicores. Okay. So similarly for container 2, if you see, I have defined the memory and CPU as 64 and 250 millicores respectively. So when the scheduler will be selecting the node, so it will calculate the requirement for this pod and check if that node has the sufficient resource available, then only it will schedule the pod over there. So now, so what is the minimum memory and CPU is required for this pod to be scheduled? So it will be the aggregate of both the containers request. So here it will come up around obviously 128 MI of memory and 500 millicores of CPU if you sum both if you sum these two request limits. Okay. Now the limits which I have defined for both the containers. So here if you see, I have defined memory limit for container 1 as 128 MI and CPU as 500 millicores. Similarly for container 2, if you see, so CPU is 500 millicores and memory is 128 MI. So this pod will not be allowed to use more than 256 MI of memory and one core of CPU on that particular node. If it tries to utilize more than the 256 MI of memory on that node, then it will be terminated with the message out of memory killing. Okay, and if this pod is tried to utilize the CPU, that is limit is 500 millicores for both the containers. So if it tries to utilize more than one core of CPU, or even it is matching that limit, then the process which are running inside this container in this pod, it will be CPU throttled. Okay, so that's all for this video. If you like this video, please give a thumbs up, and if you have any questions or concerns regarding this, please do let me know in the comment box. I will try to reply ASAP. Okay, so till then, stay safe, stay healthy. I will see you all in my next video.